Already going. So let me just bring up the agenda real quick so that we can move very quickly through all of this. So I'm calling the meeting to order. Excuse me. All right. Good morning, everybody. I'm calling the meeting to order. The first item up is our in-kind reporting. Paul, if you can get us started on that, I'd appreciate it.
Certainly, Madam Chair. If you bring up that slide, Jeff, I haven't memorized this part yet, so I'll have to read from the slide. So, all right. Regional planning efforts are enhanced by recording time donated by attendees, volunteers, and participants. TAG collects data on the time dedicated to meetings and activities to apply for use as matching funds for grants and federal dollars. If you're paid with federal dollars, please let us know now. All right. Time spent in preparation for this meeting will be estimated by PAG staff who are knowledgeable of the agenda and meeting materials. At the conclusion of this meeting, the session report will automatically calculate your time spent in this meeting. Time spent working on PAG RTA initiatives, programs, and special projects may also be eligible for consideration for matching funds. That's all I've got today, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Paul. I appreciate it. So the next item up is the approval of the meeting minutes from August 19. I need someone to make a motion.
Move to approve.
And a second.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any nays? Any nays? All right, with that, that motion passes. So the next item up is the Sonoran corridor update. Rick?
Morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I am bucking the PAG trend and wearing a different colored shirt than the typical PAG blue for a Wednesday meeting. So hopefully that sticks out a little bit. We've been meeting with the Arizona Department of Transportation's planning group overseeing the Sonoran corridor implementation, and we wanted to come and just give you a very simple, quick update on the activities that have happened over the last year. Approximately at the same time a year ago, the draft EIS was developed and was published, and it was shared with the public, with the cooperating agencies, various jurisdictions, and made available. During that time and since then, there have been a number of comments that have been received. They've been evaluated, reviewed, and then the appropriate changes, revisions, and responses developed. So since then, ADOT's continued to plug away on that effort. For written comments, they have developed written responses that will be going back to the commenting entities. Those will be awaiting signature shortly if they haven't already, and those will be going out here within the next few weeks. They've also completed the cooperating agency review efforts, and right now they're on the final steps. So essentially they're heading for FHWA legal review, which is currently underway. And at the conclusion of that, then what will be issued is a simultaneous final EIS along with the record of decision, or the ROD. And both of those are expected to come out at the end of the year. The FEIS will include, as we've talked about over the course of the time, the draft implementation, or basically an implementation plan, as well as the basic cost estimate that would be accompanying on that. So that subsequent steps can then be discussed in further detail. So that's short and sweet, but at this time I can take any questions, or if there's anything else you want me to go back and touch upon.
Does anybody have any questions for Rick?
I have a question.
Sure.
Is that just a tier 1 level EIS?
It is just a tier 1 at this point in time. That's correct. Identifies basically a 2,000 foot bandwidth, and then subsequent EIS efforts would refine that down to the right-of-way dimension.
Has there been funding available for a tier 2?
Not at this time, although the project was included in the submittal for candidate projects for RTA Next.
Thank
So
you.
it is in the hands of the CAC for review and further evaluation.
Thank you.
Rick, I have a quick note on that. Do you remember how much was actually put in for a recommendation for the RTA Next?
At the time the projects were submitted and the candidates identified, the draft EIS had not been identified. A cost estimate had not been available. So there was just a placeholder I can't even remember the dollar value anymore, but they, because of the timing on it, did not want to prejudice or preclude any foregone conclusions on the EIS. So it was a kind of left blank at that time. And then once the final cost estimate is published, then the jurisdictions, TMC and CAC can make adjustments at that time.
Thank you. And who was the jurisdiction? Was that ADOT?
That submitted it,
Yes,
included with the Pima County submittals.
thank you. Anybody else got any other questions? All right, with that, we'll move on with item number 5. David?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Oh, very good. Yes, I'm David Zenda, policy analyst here at Pima Association of Governments. It's always a pleasure to speak to you on these matters. It's quite hard to be the bad guy when we're talking about more money potentially coming to our region for our transportation projects. So of course, you're well aware of the Senate Infrastructure Bill, or the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill, or BIB, that's currently going through the legislative process. I'll just cover a couple of items relating to that. I don't know if it's better to have foggy glasses or no glasses. I guess it's better to see. All right. So going forward, I'll provide a brief overview of federal transportation authorization bills. We'll look at some of the top line numbers of the Senate bill, in particular, what it means for Arizona, and compare those amounts to FAST Act levels. That's my road now. Sorry about that. As you all may know, federal transportation funding is vitally important to our region's ability to deliver transportation projects and programs. And this is why we closely follow these authorization bills. The current transportation authorization bill, the FAST Act, shares many similarities with previous bills, defines the manner in which funds can be drawn from the Highway Trust Fund, which is a user revenue fund for a set period of time. Additionally, outlines the funding programs or rules, and authorizes an upper dollar limit made available to each program. Lastly, it prescribes how such funding is distributed to states, MPOs, and other agencies. The new projects cannot obligate or withdraw funds from the Highway Trust Fund once the authorization expires, as we saw on October 1st of this past month. Congress has frequently used a continuing resolution to extend previous authorizations. For example, FAST Act just, first expired in September 2020, but was extended 1 year. Now that extension has expired, and we have another one that's good for a month until October 31st, 2021. If the new infrastructure plan is not enacted by Halloween, an additional continuing resolution will be required to ensure that we can draw from the Highway Trust Fund and continue our projects and programs. Now turning to the current bill, which is going through the legislative process. This bill includes $550 billion in new spending relative to a baseline. And this is something I always like to emphasize. People say it's a $550 billion bill, but this is in addition to baseline, which is FAST Act levels. So 550 more than what we were used to before. The FAST Act gave us about $293.5 billion, which is our baseline. And so of that 550, 110 billion in particular is for roads and bridges. Highway safety programs is 11 billion of that 550. Public transit receives almost 40 billion of that 550. With that, that brings a total of 567.6 billion for the bottom line as total spending on surface transportation under this bill. 274 of that 550 is direct money for transportation programs. The remainder is going to be for the power and grid, the water infrastructure, et cetera. In the last year of the FAST Act, we had about 63.5 billion, which was given to federal aid highway programs, as well as transit, between the trust fund and also the general fund. The Senate bill is going to increase this to almost 91 billion per year. The new spending is divided between apportioned programs like the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, which we all love, as well as non-apportioned programs. Because this bill does not address some of the underlying issues regarding highway trust fund solvency, such as increasing user fees like gas tax, it is actually heavily supplemented by the general fund. Unfortunately, apportionments to states follow the same data based on population, vehicle miles traveled, and other data as gathered in the early 2000s under the Safety Lou bill. So this means Arizona is roughly going to get about 1.86% of the formula funding in this bill, as it did under the last 3 surface transportation authorizations. Because Arizona is a growing state, as we all know, this number from the early 2000s probably gives us a little less of a share than we ought to get. The good news is, however, is that we still may receive up to $5.3 billion in apportionments for all FHWA programs, or about $1.07 billion per year statewide. This is going to be a respectable increase from the $3.9 billion we received under 5 years of FAST Act funding. In fact, this brings us from about $775 million per year in federal money to over $1 billion on average. Keep in mind for the following discussions, though, these are apportionments, which is often greater than the actual money which hits the ledger. And also this bill is still going through the legislative process, so never know, things could change. So regarding the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, we're going to see an additional $2.2 billion in funding included in this bill nationally, bringing the total from about $10.4 billion to $12.6. Of that, Arizona could receive up to $1.2 billion over 5 years. So this increases our annual amount statewide from $200 million in the FAST Act to about $237 million on average, an 18% increase. Preliminary calculations suggest that the PAG region will see an increase in this funding, perhaps as much as $3 million more, or about $23.6 million. So it won't save the world, but it'll still be quite nice. This assumes, however, that within state sub-allocations based on population numbers will be the same as they were before, which may not be true. So that's not a hard fast number, just a general estimate, as good as we can get right now. And just briefly kind of noting some of the other projects or programs that would be of interest. We'll see an increase in National Highway Performance Program. This is in the hands of ADOT, of course, of about 26%, raising it from $2.7 billion to $2.7 billion, sorry, from $2.2 billion over 5 years. The Transportation Alternatives Grant gets a hefty 68% increase for Arizona, going from $78.3 million to $131.6 million over 5 years. Lastly, the Highway Safety Improvement Program gets a 31% increase from $221 million in FAST Act levels to $292 over 5 years with this Senate bill. So next steps to passage. As I mentioned earlier, the FAST Act extension expires on October 31st, 2021. Nothing spookier than that, I suppose. At present, the US House aspires to put a vote to the new bill by that time. Given the Senate bill's entanglement with some other ongoing legislation, it seems to be this is not thought of as a hard deadline, but a hope for a working goal. And if the bill is not signed into law by that time, of course, another continuing resolution would be required, or else we would see the furloughs as we saw for one day on October 1st among FHWA, and no more funding until we get a new authorization or continuing resolution. With that, Madam Chair, I'd love to take any questions if you have any.
Thank you very much. Is there any questions for anyone?
David, just to clarify, have we seen any changes since this was reported to Regional Council at the September meeting, or has it been steady since then?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, there have been no changes to this legislation since I reported it at Regional Council.
So David, I do have a question. Thank you very much for the update. I think this is really great, and I think it was very helpful for all of us so that we understand the financial impacts in the upcoming next 5 years and the potential to the region, which is great news. But have you been following the reconciliation initiative out on the Hill and the conversation on the compromises? Have you been following that closely? I haven't. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, Madam Chair, members of the committee, I do follow it. I chiefly follow this bill, but because they're so intertwined, I do keep track on what's going on with the reconciliation, which seems to be characterized by a lot of highs and lows. Seems like there's one step forward and 2 steps back, but it seems to be moving forward.
Okay. No, it's just because I know that Senator Kelly actually sits on that committee. So if there is anything that we think we as a region, we should be sending to him to ask for support, I think we have a really good opportunity there to make sure that he's aware of what our region needs and looks are. And I don't know if we want to think about maybe kind of sharing if we have anything that we would like specifically for consideration. I know it's a little bit too far down the road, but there's still negotiating and compromises, or if we just want him to stay status quo, but he's sitting on that committee, which is great for Arizona. So just food for thought.
Thank you.
Yep. Anything else from anybody? All right, with that, we'll move to the next item. Thank you very much, David. That was really great. I appreciate you providing all the information. So the next item up is the Highway User Fund, and I am turning that over to, ooh, hold on.
That's Nathan Barrett, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Nathan. I'm sorry.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I don't have a whole lot to say about this. In recent months, I just give you the graphs and the numbers and then allow you to ask questions if you have any questions about what you're seeing there in the report. So not to belabor this any longer than needful, do you have any questions?
I have a question, Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Catherine.
It's Catherine. Thank you. I believe at a previous meeting, and I don't remember if it was one of our TPC meetings or a one-on-one, we discussed that now that we're just showing it as the regional total, it doesn't provide a lot of clarity on what our 12.6 is doing, which is of particular interest as we're looking at what regional funds are available. So I would request that this be shown with a 12.6, since that's what comes to PAG and that we're programming. And a specific concern is I know we only programmed 21 million for fiscal year 22 in the TIP. Last year we collected, or in 20, we collected 24 million, and trends on here were 6.9% high. So it seems like there's a lot of 12.6 coming to the region that we don't have programs in the TIP. So I guess my question then is, when should we anticipate a call for project for that funding?
I don't want to get out in front of PAG leadership, but I do want to point out that because HERF 12.6 doesn't expire, it can wait until the regular TIP programming process when we start programming the 24-28 TIP next year.
So potentially just hold on to 10 to 12 million.
There is that potential, and that's kind of the default approach, because it doesn't expire like STBG or federal funds, where we did do a supplemental call for projects because those funds burn a hole in our pocket, they expire, we needed to get those programmed. But HERF 12.6 does not have that issue.
No, but I think that raises a really good point. And maybe this is a question for Dave Atler. But Dave, maybe perhaps there's a way to provide, because we do get HERFs on a monthly basis, and to understand, maybe there's a way to kind of be reporting that out. And then I understand that the adjustment to the TIP, y'all are trying to do that every 2 years. But with some of the funding challenges that we're having in the region for projects we're trying to move forward, it might be very helpful to understand what that piece is. So I'm in agreement with Catherine. So is there a way for us to maybe be looking at that from a more holistic perspective than getting this, kind of over a piecemeal?
So I want to make sure I understand what you're asking. You're asking for, I don't know if I'm hearing two different things, but you're asking for something that's well, can you repeat that? Please?
Well, I think what
I just
I'm
want to
asking,
make sure that I'm answering your question.
yeah, I think, what Catherine, and Catherine, if I'm misunderstanding, please correct me. But we know that there's more dollars coming in with the HERF. So there's this surplus. And understanding what that surplus is, what the opportunity would be as a region for us to look at actually applying those dollars toward projects that we have. We understand that there was a council decision made in 2014 that the dollars would go toward funding the RTA. But it would be really helpful for us to understand what that surplus is as a region and discussing which project we might consider putting it toward as we're moving forward in the last quarter of the current RTA plan. So I think it's looking at this holistically and understanding exactly what dollar amounts are there and what's actually available, considering what's been budgeted. Am I understanding that correctly, Catherine?
Yeah, I would say, one is the straightforward request
Right.
to go back to the charts that are provided to show explicitly 12.6
Mhm.
versus we all get locally added together with 12.6 and 2.6, because that number isn't very meaningful for programming.
Sure.
And then that would lead to the subsequent conversation of, hey, this is how much money we're kind of sitting on. Are there opportunities we're missing?
Mhm.
Because we are electing to wait 2 years to program it.
Right.
I don't know that we're really waiting 2 years. It's really an annual thing because we just recently came out with NOPAs this last summer. So I want to make sure, because, we've also heard that we want to see all the funds come in together. So rather than doing a NOFA every quarter, for example, if, we can get more money or more bang for the buck if we let this money accumulate and then do the NOFAs on an annual basis. But we can certainly show this, the breakout that you're asking for.
And the NOFAs this summer did not include the 12.6.
Understood.
Right.
So
Right.
there is already money that we're kind of sitting on.
Gotcha.
Right.
Did I understand what you?
Yes. So
Okay.
I think we would like to bring that back and have the conversation for the potential of actually programming those dollars.
Got it.
And exactly what that is. So as a team, as a region, we can have that conversation.
Got it. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. Any other questions? Any for the group? I mean, for Nathan, I'm sorry. Or for the group, for that matter.
So, Madam Chair, if I could just clarify, Catherine, are you looking for a reissue of what's been put in the packet to break out the 12.6, or are you looking for it moving forward?
A reissue would be,
True,
great.
yeah.
I know this report goes to all the subsequent committees,
Right.
so if it's in the management committee, we'll see it as well. But moving forward, I think a report that shows 12.6 explicitly and 2.6 for that matter, because those are the two funding sources that are in the tip.
Does that clarify, Paul?
Yes, it sure does. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Catherine. Appreciate that. Anything else from anybody on this item? All right, with that, we'll move forward to item number 7. An updated on the RTA forecast, and I believe, Jim, that is going to be you, sir.
Yes, Madam Chair, happy to give you an update on where we stand in terms of our most recent forecast effort with the Eller College of Economic and Business Research. As you may know, every 3 years or so, we do an updated forecast. We did our initial forecast back in 2005 in anticipation of the initial RTA election. At that point in time, we did everything in 2000 with a 2006 baseline, and then looked at nominal collections from that point forward. If you look at this graph, what you'll see in the orange bar is what we had projected in nominal dollars, so year of collection dollars inclusive of inflation, and the subsequent forecasts that we've done since that time. If you look to the left of the orange bars, the orange vertical bars, you'll see a blue bar. That represents the actual amounts collected in those years. So it basically takes us up through the end of fiscal 20. We will be adding a bar for fiscal 20, or actually it does include fiscal 21 there. So this is what we've seen over time in terms of the estimates. Lost a lot of money to the Great Recession. We've fared pretty well though this year, and the estimate that we put into the adopted budget for fiscal 22 was based on our last Eller forecast, our last baseline Eller forecast, which was done in 2019. At that point, we had identified a $94.4 million revenue estimate for fiscal '22. That was a forecast that was done prior to the pandemic, so it didn't show any of the pandemic influences. And with the budget this year, we returned to that 2019 forecast for our revenue estimates. The column to the left, the fiscal '21 actuals, that's what we actually collected last year. So our budget was about $5.5 million, well, not quite $5.5 million, $5 million short of what we actually collected last year. What we now are is 4 months into the new fiscal year, fiscal '22, and we are performing very well. We're still seeing the effects of the pandemic-related stimulus. The collections that we're showing are collections the month that we take the deposit of them. So one thing I need to let you know of whenever I talk about these deposits, they are the month that we receive them. They represent the commercial activity in the community that occurred 2 months prior. So if we're looking at an October deposit, it represents what took place at the cash register in August. So everything's kind of delayed about 2 months. So that just gives you a sense of where our collections are relative to what's happening in the community. So consequently, if you want to look at what the holiday sales season sales impact is, you look at the February collections report. So that's typically our highest deposit of the year. At any rate, the takeaway from this slide is that we are right now 13.2% above last year's collections and almost 20% ahead of our budget. So we're doing really well.
Excellent.
Now, when we look at our estimate, we ask the Economic Business and Research Center to look out 30 years. This is a long look. We use it in our short term or near-term budgeting, but it's useful to us also in terms of trying to understand what we might be looking at in, say, an RTA continuation plan. Or we also use this with the RMAP when we're looking at revenues. So it's a really useful tool for us in terms of the long-term forecast. And the forecast draws upon the national data set that comes from IHS Markit. And then the Eller Economic and Business Research Center does a statewide project called the Forecasting Project, where they look at the Tucson, Phoenix, and statewide economies and do a really deep dive. Our product or our study that we do is kind of an add-on to that particular study. When we do our studies, we also look at, in addition to our baseline estimate, we look at an optimistic and a pessimistic forecast. And we've been doing that pretty consistently. It was also a recommendation of the performance audit team that we do that. And this particular estimate, again, is, we waited a little bit to have it done in that we wanted to see more more of a resolution of what is happening with the pandemic. This is still somewhat, we have a greater level of uncertainty going forward just because the economic impacts of the stimulus and the employment and all the other things associated with the pandemic are still somewhat developing. We also recognize that the stimulus that has been pumped into the economy and the job situation, both of those are the effects of those are going to wane over time. So in terms of where we stand right now, this graph shows what's happened to the tax base over time. Now this is in nominal dollars or year of collection dollars. So it's not inflation adjusted. It includes inflation. And it shows that we've had a pretty sharp increase since the beginning of the pandemic. On this, you see vertical bars as being basically periods where we've had recessions. The Great Recession there, basically starting in 2007 and going through 2009. That's a pretty wide bar there. But you see some narrower vertical bars as well. For instance, you see on the right-hand side, you see a very narrow bar that's associated basically with the period of time that people were staying at home and what that impact that period in the economy. So we're looking at a pretty good increase, but how does that compare to where we are with inflation? So if we inflation adjust this and adjust everything to 2022 dollars, so everything from the back is inflated with to match up with current year dollars. So you'll see we've just about gotten back to where we were at the beginning of the recession. It's taken us a long time, and that depressed area to the right of the Great Recession is money that we'll never see. It's gone, and we saw as much as a 26% drop in our tax base between 2007 and 2011, and that's in part what we're dealing with now as we're looking to wind up the RTA. Putting that though on a per capita basis, it's even worse because we have seen a growth in the community, and we are also seeing changing in spending patterns, and so the available income to be spent on taxable items has on a per capita basis, inflation adjusted to basically 2022 is declined. The other thing I wanted to point out was, what's happening in the tax base, and this is Pima County, and you'll see that it doesn't go all the way to the current date. We don't have information that goes past 2019, so this is the best that they've got available to them over at the Economic Business and Research Center. But what it's showing here is a change in what our residents are doing with their personal income. Your personal income can be put into the purchase of goods. It can also be put into the purchase of services, which are non-taxable. Healthcare is a big one. You can also invest it. You can put it in the bank. But this is what this is the percentage that Pima County residents are taking of their personal income and consuming goods with it that are taxable. So it's about 34%. And that was what it was in 2019. If you compare that to what it was just prior to the recession, Pima County residents were spending 45% of their income on the consumption of goods that were taxable. So our tax collections are affected by that. And this is a national trend, and this is what's been projected out. You'll see to the right of the pandemic, and during the pandemic, things plummeted, and then they shot right back up with the stimulus, and we're still in that kind of peaking area there to the right of the vertical bar on 2020. But our expectation is that this trend will resume after, and that this pandemic-related pattern of goods consumption is going to eventually wane, and then we'll be back to that increasing amount of service consumption versus products consumption or goods consumption. This is a projection of what we think is going to happen to nominal disposable income growth in Pima County. You'll see again. To the right of the pandemic, you'll see a big increase in personal disposable income growth, and then you'll see a drop below, or a negative growth That's expected to happen in 2022, calendar year 2022. And that's as the stimulus starts to wear off and people are still, the economy's still in the recovery mode. But in the long term, we're looking at about a 4% growth. And again, this is nominal dollars. So this is inclusive of inflation.
Jim?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Diana, can you go back to the other slide? Just a quick clarification. The drop, you're saying that's next year in fiscal year 23? They're anticipating a drop in that due to the coming off of the stimulus money. Did I hear that correctly?
That's my understanding of it. Yes, is that
Okay,
we're going to
thank
see
you.
as the stimulus wanes and the impact wanes, we will see a negative growth for 1 year in Pima County nominal disposable income. And we'll see that reflected in revenue projections as well. In fact, you can see that in this particular slide. This is what we expect in terms of yield for the RTA. Again, nominal
Right.
dollars includes inflation. You can see that we're still in a rapid upswing, and then you'll see it kind of stagnate and decline slightly. That's where you see that reduction in nominal income, expressed in terms of our sales tax yield or TPT yield. So we'll see it grow from 99.7 million, which is what we collected last year, fiscal 21, up through at the end of the projection, 2051, $246 million per year. Now, putting that in terms of a growth rate, our vision is better, closer in terms of the dates. So the near term is probably more likely to or has a higher confidence than the out years. When we look at the out years, it's more dictated by national trends. And so we're looking at about a 3% nominal growth or growth in nominal dollars in the long term on the RTA with the baseline revenue scenario. Again, we're seeing the short term peaking. We see a little bit of a setback once we look at that decline in nominal income, and then we return to the 3% annual growth. This is, when we look at it, as I mentioned to you, we do a pessimistic and an optimistic forecast in addition to our baseline. You can see those expressed on this graph. One of the interesting things is when you look at the pessimistic, you expect it to stay below the baseline, but in fact, it actually increases and goes above the baseline in the out years. And that's really based upon the assumption of increased inflation. So it would be in a more pessimistic outlook, we would be looking at higher inflation. And that's why you see that dollar figure or that collection amount pass over the baseline. If we are to take and then bring it back down to fiscal $22, this is what the projections look like. So expressed in fiscal $22, we're looking at somewhere around $124 million per year collected in 2051 in today's dollars. So, this is useful to us in what we're using this for. And first of all, looking at the current plan, we're looking at what this does to our revenue estimate through the end of the RTA plan in 2026. This is about $60 million more favorable than we were looking at in the 2019 revenue estimate. So, that's something that we'll take into consideration. And we also will be looking at, when you compare it to the original $2.1 billion in 2006 revenue. It goes up to $1.68 billion. Or goes to $1.68 billion. So it's less than the 2006 original estimate. The other thing I wanted to point out is that if you look at it in current or in 2022 year dollars, if we were to extend the RTA for 20 years, depending upon when that extension occurs, we could be looking at an additional $2 to $2.3 billion to program if it's kept at the current half-cent rate. So that's something that we can consider as we're looking at RTA years. And with that, I think I've droned on long enough. I know this is pretty dry stuff, and there's death by 1,000 graphs, but happy to try to answer as best I can any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Jim. Is there any questions from anybody?
Madam
I
Chair,
have a quick, oh,
I don't know who else spoke. Somebody online spoke. I have a quick question. And that is just, you mentioned what we would get if we continued this the next 20 years. I'm wondering if we're married to using Eller continuing on for the next 20 years, because looking at the table that was in the packet in terms of each of the estimates, it doesn't seem like we've tracked very closely to any of their estimates. And so, this is a big gamble, it seems, looking at a 20-year outlook, trying to go again. This one, we're going to be $1 billion short based on this current estimate. So,
Yeah, I don't know that anybody would have predicted how severe the effects of the 2008 recession were. I mean, that was a once in a lifetime economic reset, if you will. And it profoundly changed. One of the things, it's not just the reduction in the revenue that was associated with the loss of those jobs and the impact on the economy. It really changed our forecast and how we would grow. And that's where you really see the impact of what's happened between the 2006 estimate and what we're seeing now. If we were accepting and we had accepted the population growth estimates that were done by the state or done statewide, it showed that we would be looking at probably somewhere in the 1.2 million population right now. We're not there. And those, the 200,000 people that didn't move to Tucson aren't producing revenue for us and creating TPT. So that's probably as impactful as anything when it comes to the estimate. And I think getting the, it's all about what estimates or what your baseline is or what your assumptions are when you're making these estimates. And I think the assumptions now that we're looking at are far more moderate. So I think, I don't expect us to see a significant reduction in our growth. If we start seeing negative growth in our population, we probably will see something different. If there are other profound changes that we experience societally, it's going to affect us. But this is if you look at those growth forecasts on a going forward basis, if you were to adopt the pessimistic forecast, it would basically say we're not growing at all. And we're just going to continue to collect at the $100 million, $110 million a year on a going forward basis. And that would be a very conservative estimate. And, as we're considering our range of options, that may be something we want to do, leaving any money that is above that as something that could be programmed annually as it comes in. So, and I'm getting way ahead of myself on this response, so I better stop now.
No, but Jim, to ask a question to piggyback on that, and I know that someone on the phone also has a question, but I want to piggyback off of what you said. Did y'all have Eller look at the potential population growth?
No,
Because I think that that's a very legit, conversation to be having about our potential growth, because, the millennials and Gen X and Gen Zs are doing things very different. A lot of them are not having children. A lot of them are having children late. And that really is a dynamic I think we need to consider when we're talking about estimating out not just the population growth, but also vehicle miles traveled and all of that modeling we were doing. So I'm just curious, did y'all have Eller look at that as well?
No, I believe Eller accepted what the statewide demographic or state
They do.
demographic information. That's all approved and vetted statewide and through our pop tax. So those are things that that we did not ask them to look at.
Okay, thank you. And I know somebody I'm not sure who it was, had a question for Jim. So I'm going to open it up to the person on the phone.
This is Keith. So Jim, on the slide that you had on the consumption of goods relative to disposable income, the trend line they were showing.
Yeah.
If you can go back to that slide.
I'll try. It's back a bit here. Let me see if I can get to it.
Nope.
Whoop.
There
That's the national. This is the experienced locally.
Yeah, so you experience locally, we're seeing sort of a plateauing in the 30% range, but you go to the national trend and it seems like it's heading to zero. It seems like there's got to be a floor somewhere. I mean, everybody's not going to be rice and beans by candlelight. I mean, they're going to be spending money on something.
Yeah, and this is a national trend. I think this came out of the IHS market materials. That is something that we have seen in prior forecasts. It's been adjusted to show the effect of the recent consumption spike that we've seen associated with the pandemic. At
Well,
this point,
you can see though that it kind of plateaued after the Great Recession. It kind of reset and created a new normal for a few years.
Yeah.
And then there was a dip during the pandemic, but it doesn't seem to me that it would just fall off the cliff like they're showing.
Yeah, I mean, what this is assuming is that we are going to be more frugal in our consumption. I think it probably reflects a lot the attitudes of the millennials and their consumption patterns. There is a kind of a move to experiences over assets in terms of what millennial or what the
Millennials don't
younger
say.
generation groups are spending their disposable income on. And as we age, aging America is going to require more healthcare, and healthcare is a service that's not taxed. So I believe that's largely what this is reflecting.
Okay. And then can you go back to the original slide you had on the estimate of the RTA projections over time, the one Catherine was talking about?
Let's see. Are you talking?
Very, very beginning.
The first slide.
Oh, the first slide. Oh,
Yes, there you go. So
Right
what
here,
are the gray and the gold and what are the gray and the gold bars for?
okay. I see what you're saying. Apparently this version of PowerPoint has eliminated a lot of the material that goes with the other forecasts. We did a forecast in 2013.
So are those pessimistic and optimistic then?
Now, these are all baseline. So if you look at 2013, we did an estimate with Eller in 2013. That was where we'd actually done an estimate in 2010 that was not very detailed. We were still in the midst of the economic downturn. Things were still falling in 2010. So,
Okay. So those are previous estimates, but the blue is the latest and the greatest.
yeah, blue to the left of the bar is the latest and greatest.
Okay.
The other colors are each year we add in, or each 3 years we add in a new estimate, and the estimate is further to the right. So our estimate in 2013 was more optimistic than we actually experienced even then. The 2015 estimate, or I know there was one in 2017 and one in 2019. So those estimates all got closer to where we're actually at. The latest estimate is actually more favorable than the prior estimates had been.
I see. I think it might be helpful to go back in time about 3 to 5 years and show what hypothetical actuals would have been. Because you look at these 2006 estimates and they seem very generous based on what the actuals were before the recession. Seems like it was an aggressive projection.
I'm not sure I understand what you're asking for. Are you asking for additional?
Well, if you, I would kind of like to see what about 3 to 5 years before the RTA, what the actuals were, because if you look at these orange versus the blue, it seems like it was an aggressive forecast out of the gate.
Got it. I see what you're saying. I did not plot that. I have all that information. We have actuals, and if you were to look at the series going further back in time, you would find that the growth was pretty much in alignment with what we had been seeing prior to that.
Okay.
I can share that with you, but I can go into a deeper dive on that for you if you'd like.
Only a couple years back. It just seems like it was out of step at the beginning. I think that's what Catherine was kind of alluding to, is some of the aggressiveness of the forecast.
Yeah, I think what you may find is this, I mean, if you look at the actuals in terms of what happened to the tax base, you're seeing it going back into the 80s here. So we had a fundamental reset.
Yeah.
Those are dollars that are in nominal dollars. If you had taken and extended a straight line from or from 1985 on through 2005, you'd see a very different picture right now.
Okay. Thank you.
So, Jim, I have one quick question, but before I ask my question, does anybody else have any questions for Jim? So Jim, I'm just curious, if y'all had Eller also do projections for the 1 penny sales tax, you know, given that we've gone back to the state legislation and they approved the potential for a 1 penny sales tax. Have y'all also looked at that dynamics and what that potentially might look like?
We have not. We didn't ask them to do that directly. However, I think it would be a simple matter of just applying a factor to the forecast.
Well, it should change up a little bit, but I was just curious.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, at this point in time, we didn't look at what 1 penny would do in terms of, you know, would it reduce the impact or reduce purchasing?
Right.
Items? Yeah, we didn't.
Because it does. So that's why I was just wondering if we did a forecasting for 1 penny to understand, because everyone thinks you can just double it, but you really just can't do that.
Yeah. There are some things that are tax sensitive, some that are not, so totally inelastic.
Do y'all plan on doing a 1 penny forecasting?
I think at this point we would be looking for direction on doing that. It's certainly something that we could ask for. It was not part of the scope of this study.
Okay. Where would you look for that recommendation to come from?
RTA board, and depending upon what the CAC is recommending to the board in terms of a packet of projects.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any other questions for Jim on this item?
Yes, Madam Chair, this is Anna.
Go ahead.
So Jim, I'm just sorry, I might have missed it. So I think Catherine's original question was, are we married to using Eller, or is that who we're going to continue to use from this point forward?
At this point in time, we have a history with Eller. The board can direct us to do something different if they chose to. We've been very satisfied with the responsiveness of Eller, and we find that their forecasting has been pretty reasonable. We know that the early forecasts were based on a history that is not currently being, the prior history upon which the 2006 estimate was forecast was based upon a set of assumptions that have changed. So if we change the underlying assumptions, then we get a different outcome.
And do we change those assumptions every time they do an estimate for us?
The national assumptions are addressed through the IHS market study. The Arizona, the statewide forecasting project looks at statewide trends and makes adjustments there. And then we generally take a subset of that and use it for our projections. We could do whatever the committee or whatever the RTA board and others want us to do. It's just at this point in time, this is what we've done. There's different direction, we'll get a different product.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, any other questions on this item? Thank you very much, Jim. That was very informative. I appreciate it. So our next item up is, again, an RTA plan update, cost to complete, funding options, and statutory mandates and implementation requirements. And once again, Mr. DeGroom, you have the floor. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll be brief because this is largely material that we presented to the board last month. So what I did want to do is I wanted to give you an update on how this is, how our presentation would change in light of the new revenue forecast. So that's really what the takeaway is here. In terms of where we're at, as you know, we have a TIP that programs to the ballot amount the projects, and one of the other things that we all need to recognize is that due to the recession and due to that loss of revenue that we were anticipating, the board in 2014 directed us to put the fiscal 2020 to 2026 state and federal funds or apply those to meeting the RTA plan. Now, where we stand right now, we had presented a larger figure in terms of what the gap is. Right now, we're looking at a gap that is in the $88 to $131 million range based upon the materials that we presented to the board. This is using the cost estimates that the RTA developed. We know that those are estimates that we will be working on refining with our jurisdictional partners. They are somewhat higher than some of the other estimates that we've seen, and that those estimates also include some expansions in scope. So we'll be working through the cost side of it together with our jurisdictional partners to come up with a new cost estimate. But if we use the existing cost estimate or the cost estimate we presented to the board in September, the gap is between 88 and 131 million, depending upon how optimistic our forecast.
So Jim, can you go back to that slide? So basically you're saying that the funding lead agencies, there's approximately 88 to 131 million of funding that's above the 2006 scope ballot, that the lead agencies are going to have to come up with the funding amount?
We've not said where the funding is going to come from. We're saying this is the gap. If we look at applying all of the revenues that the RTA has available to the scopes and the cost estimates that we have now. So that's what this represents. It's a comparable to what we had shown to the board last month. And I know that.
But in this slide, it says right there, there's a need for the lead agencies to identify the shortfall. So in essence, y'all are coming back and putting that gap on the lead agencies, so on the jurisdictions that are handling these projects.
Yeah, that's they're the lead agencies' projects. Yes. Okay. Moving on, in terms of. Hello. Now, if we look at what's in the TIP in terms of uncommitted project funds, we've got $97.1 million that was in the TIP. if we, what we put into the last year's budget, or I'm sorry, into the fiscal 22 budget, using our updated the forecast revenue that we had in the adopted fiscal 22 budget, that gap goes, or the available uncommitted funding increases to $149 million, basically. That's what we were using as the bottom end of the range that we were talking about at the September meeting in terms of the gap, what the gap was. With the new estimate, the new revenue estimate, our baseline goes up from 148.9 to $204.5 million of available uncommitted revenue to help meet the gap. That's where we get the remaining gap with, if we were to apply those fully to the outstanding or the remaining RTA projects, we'd be looking at that $131 million gap still to fill. If we look at the optimistic forecast, and what this does, and this is to your point earlier, Catherine, we restore the HERF 12 to what it was in the prior estimates, the pre-pandemic estimates for HERF 12R. And we use the new revenue forecast with the optimistic revenue within it, that gap or the available revenues to program on remaining projects would be $247.3 million, leaving an $88 million gap in funding. I hope that made sense. I know that's a lot of numbers being thrown at you.
Madam Chair,
Go ahead, please.
so let me see if I understand this correctly. So this is uncommitted revenue projections. Is this RTA 12626 and federal, or just RTA?
This is regional funds available that would be available to program within the TIP. That would include HERF 12R or the 12.6 funds at the prior rate. It does not change the STP or STBG at all. The STBG that's already programmed to RTA projects is still considered as it was in the TIP. And it includes the new revenue forecast of the RTA that came from the Eller EBRC.
Okay, and is the 2.6 included in the 12.6?
I did not include any 2.6 in this estimate.
So then that's saying, I just want to make sure I understand the pessimistic forecast. That means that at one point there was 97.1 available to program. Is that
Right.
Is that like the numbers that we use for the current NOPAs that were out? Like we have the RTA being decided on right now. There was proper projects. Is that number included in that 97.1? So we're currently waiting to see for the NOPA for the RTA funding about where those are going to go.
Right.
And it was about 30 million, if I remember. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, if you looked at the 4 projects, the aggregate amount requested of the 4 projects was a little over 47 million. That drops because we did program some STBG and CRISA funds.
Right.
That's now at $40 million is what we're looking for.
So I mean,
That
that's
40 million could be partially satisfied with these dollars that we're showing here, yes.
I guess that was my question.
Yeah.
Is there 97.1 plus the 3047 we're trying to program, or is the 3047 part of this 97.1?
The $247 million is the new estimate that would be above the 97.1 that is the old estimate. The 97.1 million is what we show in the current adopted fiscal 22 to 26 TIP. In terms of
That has not
uncommitted
been
funds.
committed.
That is not committed in the TIP, correct?
But I think, if I heard Anna's question correctly, Jim, is that the money that's being pledged through the NOFA, is that part of the 97.1 million? Was that your question, Anna?
Yes, yes.
Yes. The
Okay,
answer is, we would be using funds that were in the, that were in that estimate to meet it. The
Okay.
97.1 also did not include the $20 million of revenue from fiscal 21 that was over the budgeted revenue amount.
Wow.
So the $247 million optimistic forecast, or all the other forecasts do include that.
Okay.
That was in the amended budget.
Okay, thank you.
thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, then, we, again, stating what the gap as we see it now is between 88 million and 131 million. We know that there are also committed non-RTA revenues that have been impacted. We do, as to your point earlier, Madam Chair, we do identify the local governments as being responsible for their projects and the funding. And we will be making these additional funds available to meet those needs on a project by project going forward basis.
Jim, just one quick question. On the gap and the funding gap, that slide again, I'm kind of stuck on that one slide about the difference in the or what I call scope creeping. Are we sure it's scope creeping and it's just not inflationary cost? Is that's creating that gap of what to do the projects?
I
'Cause,
think
I mean,
the gap is,
I mean, this 88 million to whatever it is, I think some of this is inflation cost, not necessarily scope creep. And but yet that slide kind of puts it back completely on the backs of the jurisdictions. And I'm kind of concerned about that.
yeah, it's a combination of effects. There's inflation. There's also, when you think of inflation, you think of what's happening with goods and, purchasing commodity, purchasing labor, but it's also real estate, which is when we're doing right-of-way acquisitions, the cost of those has exceeded, the rate of change of that is probably higher than any inflation rate. That's in there, as is the cost of project elements that were not in the original scope that was presented to the voters back in 2000.
So I would ask that we go back and correct that slide, because to me, the way it's drafted and it's presented, and this is a public record, it actually is reflecting that burden is falling on the leading agencies. And that's not necessarily the case, because it's not necessarily scope. It's insurance. It's inflation. It's, as you said, right-of-way acquisition. There's different things that play in to create that gap. And that's not necessarily something that should be on the leading agency, but as a region, we should be discussing how to manage that gap and that shortfall.
Yeah.
I'm all for it. If there's true scope creep, I'm all for having the conversation about the leading agencies, might be actually helping with funding of that, since we're tight on dollars. But if it's truly not a scope creep, it's just all the fact of building a project, I don't think it's fair to throw that on the leading agency. So I think that slide is very misleading and unfair, and I'd like to see it changed.
Okay. At this point in time, I think there may be some opinion differences on things that we would acknowledge. At this point, we can only provide funds that we have available to us. I don't know that we're looking to blame anybody. What we're trying to do is get through this and try to deliver the projects as best we can with the funds and resources that we have available. And I think that's really where we need to be looking. We know that there are other sources of funding that are going to be out there. This slide shows a number of places that we can look for additional funding. We also know that looking at how we're delivering our projects, there may be some efficiencies there. I did put out a letter to the TMC members from the jurisdictions projects, asking for their suggestions. If there were things, I know that the city has got some ideas. I know we've received a response from Mr. Huckleberry as well. So these are all things that we can look at as well. And I think we also need to look at our projects and what do we need to deliver in order to meet to be responsive to our public in terms of its transportation needs. So, those all have to be in this mix.
So you had mentioned, Jim, difference of opinions. So who's having those conversations that's leading to the difference of opinions?
I don't know that there is, I couldn't tell you what conversations are taking place. I know that our
We have difference of
director and our
opinion then.
attorney have been looking into the matter, and certainly the, looking at the laws to where that all resides. That's a different conversation.
Okay.
Okay, well, continuing on, in terms of our next steps, we will be bringing the project review task force together to help us look at projects in terms of where the cost estimates are. I know this is something that we did with the last batch of projects that went to construction. We need to revisit that with the project task force.
Hey, Jim, I'm sorry. Can you just remind me again of who all sits on the project review task force?
The project review task force is, I believe it was originally chaired by Mr. Sella. Mr. Sella passed away. Right now, there are co-chairs that have been identified in Mr. Bernal and Mr. Lewick. And we also have, I believe, Mr. Anarino and Mr. Thompson have agreed to serve on this as well.
Could you send out to this committee the individuals that'll be involved in that project review task force? And I don't know, do y'all have like a resume or some background on their expertise?
I'm certain we can come up with that information. Yeah, at this
That
point,
would be great.
we have yet to have them convene a meeting yet. And we will be having a technical management committee meeting next month, where we'll have the opportunity to discuss this further as well. And I believe you sit on that committee, so.
Yes.
And we will also need to look at our POPs just to make sure that the project costs that we've identified within our cost estimates are consistent with the POPs and our IGA agreements. And then once that's done, then we recommend that the RTA board annually review the available revenue. We know this revenue number is going to move. We know the cost numbers are going to move as well. We need to look at them on an annual basis as projects are ready to go to construction to make sure we can get the funding in place for them. And with that, that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Jim. And I know we gave some questions through it, but does anybody have any questions before we move on?
Madam Chair, I have a question. Catherine.
Yes, go ahead, Catherine.
In the financial considerations portion of the agenda item in the packet, I think this is a claim that's made over and over, is that, the Great Recession in 2008 construction bids were more favorable, and as a result, many RTA projects were completed within funding amounts allocated. I'm curious what substantiates that statement, because the 2017 audit showed that the 10 completed RTA projects that were completed as of June 30th, 2016, 8 of the 10 had come in over budget. So that would have captured that time of the Great Recession when the favorability was there. So I believe the statement's based just on the RTA amount, but not the actual projects.
Yeah, it is the RTA amount. And I know, for instance, we looked at a number of those projects where additional funds were brought to bear on them to meet specific needs. I know that in many cases, there were projects that had drainage that went above and beyond what was originally contemplated in the estimate. There were funds brought to bear on it, and it was built and it was delivered for a cost higher than the original cost estimate. But in terms of the RTA funds that were put into the project, the RTA funds were either at or below the amounts that were identified.
So could you specify then how much regional funding came into play? Because these came in about 20% over
Mhm.
the RTA budgeted amount, which is close to what the estimates were for the RTA. But this seems to be a statement that's very misleading when you tell the committee you're right, that these projects are coming in under budget when they are routinely over budget. And I'm not sure also you're implying that there was a lot of scope creep on these projects, and that would be another one.
Yeah.
Could you cite that? I think it's really good to have evidence that kind of supports these broad
I agree.
statements that are, I would say, misleading.
Okay, well, I hear what you're saying, and we can go into that if it's something that's worth doing. So, yeah.
Well, I think, Jim, I have to agree with Catherine on this.
Mhm.
And I'll tell you why. And it's because these documents, you put them out, and even though people, and this is taped, but this is now something that the public sees. And sometimes the public doesn't go back and actually view these meetings that are available for them to have the conversation. They're just looking at the materials, and the material is very misleading. And that's concerning because I use the word scope creep. That's not what was in the slide, but in essence, y'all put it very nicely. I just brought it to the forefront and call it scope creep. And I don't necessarily agree that it's scope creep. I believe a lot it is inflation, cost of construction, cost of right of way that's created these overruns in the projects, which should be part of the overall project, not necessarily scope creep. And so I just want to be mindful of that, because when we put materials out, that's what we're representing.
And if I could just add, to be very specific, like a Twin Peaks, where it shows that it only used half the RTA that was necessary. That was because there was the exchange of STP money for RTA money to advance the project. So that was a decision that was made that now you're reflecting, 50% savings on the RTA, but that's not really the case. We just made a choice to use regional funds. Right now, we would count those as RTA funds. Back then, we didn't.
Mhm.
It
Yeah.
just really doesn't paint a clear picture of the funding for these projects.
What I would tell you on Twin Peaks, for example, is that if you were to look at the construction cost estimate relative to what was estimated going into it for the construction component of the work, it actually did come in under the engineer's estimate at the time, under the construction estimate. There were a lot of expenses in right of way, and there were additional funds brought to bear. If you look at that, if you're looking at the audit report should be very clear in terms of the amount spent and shows the sources.
But the statement that these projects came in under budget, that one ended up at 77.6 million versus 76.4 in the ballot. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think
top
we're
construction savings?
This is not something that I think is worth arguing over. It's shown there in the materials. I'll be happy to look at specific cases of how you feel that we may be needing to represent things differently. But at this point in time, those monies, we did not expend those from the RTA fund. So the RTA fund did not pay that amount. Yes, we used federal funds. We had amassed a fair amount of federal money on that project, and we used that preferentially to the RTA because those RTA dollars have more utility to us because they don't come with federal funding requirements. So, yeah.
My recommendation would be when we make statements that the projects were completed within their budgets, that has some citation and backup to substantiate that statement.
Okay.
Because it
You
is
know, we
not
can-
accurate.
We can certainly add additional footnoting and things like that, certainly. Yeah, I would agree with that. It's not our interest to misrepresent or represent other than what the actual outcomes were, so.
Madam
Thank you.
Chair, a quick question.
Sure, go ahead.
Jim, can we just go back to the slide where we show the gap? I just want to make sure I understand something. The funding gap?
Yeah.
Is it 88 to 113 or what did I see?
88 to 131 is what we're currently showing based upon, the set of estimates that we presented to the board and the updated revenue.
So that's in the 5 years, in the next 5 years. So we show a funding need of 88 to 113. Is that what I'm trying to understand? Is that
I'm
what
not sure where
gap
the
is?
113 came
What-
from.
what-
Should be 131.
I don't know where this, I'm sorry, can you bring up the slide, please? 131. Sorry. So projected revenue can reduce the funding need. Okay. So the projected revenue that we talked about, the 247 million or the
Yes,
247 million, the very optimistic one.
that's the one where we're restoring the 12.6 to its pre-RTA route amounts.
So if
And-
that was realized, then our funding gap could be reduced from 88 to 131, depending on the total project estimates of the remaining projects.
Right, if we accept the prior cost estimates, and we're gonna be working on those as well, but if we were to accept that and we were to accept the favorable or the optimistic forecast, the gap would be 88 million. If we were to accept the baseline forecast and the same costs, the gap would be 131 million.
Thank you for that coverage.
Sure.
Oh, Jim, I don't know where to have this conversation. I'm not sure if the TPC is the appropriate place, but I think we have to have the conversation about the remaining projects and what that cost is, this gap. And then really what is considered scope creep and what is not considered scope creep. Because, there's a lot of need of flexibility. And we've been having this conversation since I got here 3 years ago about there's not enough flexibility built into the current RTA plan to allow for adjustments in projects that really need to be considered to make it a valuable project. Because again, these were all actually scoped out over 20 years ago. And so I don't know if I necessarily agree that it's scope creep. It's actually building the right project for today's time and growth. And that's really what we should be doing. So I think I don't know where to have that conversation, but I would like us to be having that conversation.
I think that's the conversation that needs to take place through the technical management committee and was supported with their policy or with the project subcommittee or project task force. I think that's the place to have that particular conversation. It needs to take place.
And who sits on the project task force?
Pardon me?
You just said that this conversation should happen with the project task force.
I said the technical management committee, or I'm sorry, the technical management committee,
Okay,
and they're supported by their project task force.
okay. I think that should be a conversation sooner than later.
Well, we're working on a meeting with the technical management committee next month. I believe it's tentatively scheduled for the 18th. And this same material will be, available, updated and presented. So it's something that I think you'll have that opportunity.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that. Because I think what we don't want is to be pitted against each other. I think we want to come up with that conversation and then how we're going to move that forward. Any other questions for this item? All right, I think with that, we can move forward to the next item. So the next item up is, does anybody have any future agenda items?
Madam Chair, this is Paul. Just something that will be coming your way. We recently received the ADOT safety projections for where they expect crash numbers to be in calendar 2022. That will be coming through.
I'm sorry, Paul, can you repeat that? You voiced out.
The ADOT safety projections for where they expect crash numbers to be in calendar 2022 have been released. So that will be coming through TPC.
Excellent. Please tell me that they are not raising it again.
We'll have that discussion at the TPC meeting. But again, these are.
It kills me, y'all. It kills me.
Not where they would like them to be. So we'll get into all of that discussion.
Okay, well, I will tell you, nationally, the data has been showing that there's been a higher increased number of crashes that have led to fatalities across the country due to reduced vehicle mile travel on the roadways. So people feel more comfortable and they're speeding and they're hitting, then they're crashing and they're dying. So that's been a national trend for the past 18 months and it's super sad. And it's also been the trend in Tucson. So thank you. I look forward to that dialogue. Y'all know how passionate I am about that.
I love it.
We got to work on safety. We got to do something to get people to think different when they're behind the wheel of a car. Okay, I have an agenda item I would like to ask for. I would like to have a report come back to this committee about dollars that have been reduced in the overall PAG programs. So I know that we have over the past few years been reducing programs and then that frees up dollars to move over to the RTA. I would like to understand those programs that we've reduced and the impacts that it's having, not necessarily impacts, but I'd just like to understand what programs in the PAG have had their budgets reduced so that those dollars become freed up to move over to the RTA so that we can have a conversation about what that potential effect and the region can have.
I think we captured that, so we'll work on that.
Thank you.
With Dave and the work program team. Bring something your way.
Can it say so it'll be programs that have been reduced or eliminated since a certain time frame, so it's a certain year or?
Well, Anna, that's a really good question. Do we want to go look at the last 5 years? Or the last 3 years? I mean, I'm open.
I mean, I think maybe it was in 2014 when it was determined that all the regional available funding would need to go to the RTA. So maybe we can go back to 2014 at least.
Okay, I'm good with that.
Thank you.
No, thank you. It's just that there's some really good opportunities coming down the pipeline in the current infrastructure bill. And I just want us to make sure that we're not missing out on those opportunities. So I think this recap would be really an important conversation to have at this time.
Yes, I agree.
Any other future agenda items?
Madam Chair, if I can point something out, next month's meeting happens to fall at the same time as the management committee. So at this point, we're not scheduling a meeting for November for TPC.
Is this committee okay with that? Skipping a month and going to December? Does anybody, let me put it this way. Does anyone have any objections with jumping November and going to December?
So before we decide that, there was some information, new information we were gonna get. But I guess for the HERF 06, we're just gonna reissue that to everybody.
But we're going to revise it and that'll be submitted to the management committee next month.
Oh.
That's how we'll handle it.
So for number 6, we thought, so we're going to revise it and then it will be presented to technical management committee?
No, management committee.
Management.
Mhm.
And that is happening next month?
I've already talked to staff about it.
So here's in the packet today for CPC. It will have that revision as it appears in the packet for management.
How about the revisions to the presentation we just discussed? The prior presentation on the RTA, the gaps. All right, can we make some revisions to that before we move that forward to the is that going forward to the management committee, or was that just for this committee review?
That's TMC, right?
That would go through TMC, and that was information. This was basically based on what we presented to the board last month. And
Okay, so it's already been presented to them?
with the updated information and how the new economic forecast affected it.
No, Jim, I know that the forecast was actually presented to the management committee last month, because that was I thought it'd be, because we discussed that, and I thought it'd be really great for this committee to hear that forecast, and that was excellent. But then the next presentation that you did on the funding gaps and all of that, we had a very healthy conversation about some of the way that the terminology is on it. Is that presentation moving forward to any other committee after this one?
I believe we'll be presenting a version or an update or have a continuing conversation with the board about this on the 29th. So it'd be a week from Friday.
Okay, so my question is, will you be changing that one slide that we're having this conversation on?
Which slide are you referring to? The one
It was the slide about the funding gap between 88 million and 131 and the lead agencies. We had that very healthy conversation. I mean, about switching that up so it's not like, that it's on the lead agencies for these scoping creeps. And, I know that's my terminology, and we're not necessarily in agreement that everything's a scoping creep.
I'll commit to reviewing that slide between now and the 29th. Yes.
Okay, I'm just asking because, if it comes out in that material, I'm going to raise it as a conversation, I guess I'm saying. So if we can think about maybe wording it so it's a little bit more about there's been increases due to inflation, due to right-of-way acquisition, so on, not necessarily all of it is scoping creep. Because I think we have, again, I think we have to have the conversation, and we're going to have that in the technical review committee meeting. I think we need to have that conversation so we're all on the same page, because right now we're not, and that's going to create some controversy. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
So I appreciate you reviewing it, but I think we need a little bit more than just a review, is what I'm asking for. Maybe we can have a sidebar conversation, Mr. DeBrew. Okay. Any other items for a future agenda?
So the question still remains from Dave Atler is if the committee is okay with
Thank
skipping
you.
the meeting in November.
Yes. Does anybody here have an issue with jumping over November and having our meeting in December? If you do, please speak up now. If you do not, just don't say anything and we'll take it as a yes. Okay, so not hearing anything, Dave, I think that as a group, we're okay with skipping over November and we'll all meet in December. So everybody have a great, happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
No, thank you. And so our last item on the agenda is adjournment. Do I have to take a motion for adjournment?
Yes, please.
So can I please,
I second.
all right.
We have several motions and several seconds.
I heard that. So y'all just pick someone and write it into the minutes. All right, everybody, we've got a first and a second, so we'll, all in favor of adjournment, say
Aye.
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 Perfect. I should just say anybody opposed and then just go with that. Does anybody oppose? So with that, we will adjourn for the day. I want to thank everybody for a very healthy conversation and making my first meeting